Welcome back everybody to Forza Horizon 5, and today we're taking a look at the 1991 Toyota Sera. So now this was a part of a car, this was a one generation car basically, but it did have three phases that were different trim levels that were produced over the course of its life, which was between February 1990 and December 1995, with 15,941 being built, which is a decent amount for a car that at the end of the day might be quite a hard sell because of the design of the car. Mechanically though, it is quite basic and not particularly interesting. It is similar to the likes of the Paseo and the Starlet, also from Toyota. So yeah, that means it's front wheel drive, it's not got a particularly interesting engine, that's not overly powerful, and yeah, that on the whole makes it not particularly interesting. But styling wise, this is a very interesting car and it is a good looking one as well. The front looks pretty cool. I like the headlights and the general shape of the front bodywork, but then it's the doors and the canopy that this car has going on. So yeah, you've got a very sharply raked windscreen, and then you've got these butterfly doors that have your normal windows, but then they also have the roof canopy windows on them as well. These doors in fact inspired Gordon Murray when it came to the McLaren F1's doors, so you might not have had the McLaren F1 looking the way it does if it wasn't for this car. But yeah, those glass roof panels on the top of the doors mean that it's got a huge amount of glass in the car as well. And then you've also got the rear windscreen, which again is really rather quite sharply raked, and extends well over where the heads of the rear passengers would be as well. So it reminds me a lot of the AMC Pacer in terms of just the sheer amount of glass that is there. But because obviously this has a lot of solar aspects to it, and the fact that it's going to be really rather quite hot due to the amount of glass that is in it, came with air conditioning as standard and climate control as standard as well. So you're not going to be cooking yourself in here despite the way that it looks. And practicality wise, despite being a coupe, it is reasonably capacious inside. No, it doesn't have the widest of spaces getting in, but it's got quite a deep boot space, and the rear seats can be folded down as well, so you can turn the entire rear into cargo space. I like the rear in terms of the design. It's not as interesting as the front in terms of the way it looks, but it's still pretty decent. We've also got twin exhausts. Not a massive fan of the way the wheels look, but they just look typically 90s to be honest. And interior wise, it's also pretty cool as well, especially when you get the door down and you're cocooned in this canopy. So yeah, it's just so light and airy. It just feels a lot more modern than you might anticipate it to be. I also like the shape of the dashboard. Kind of reminds me of a Ford, Focus maybe, or something, or Fiesta or something or other, from their Edge design. But this is obviously 1991, and the Edge Ford designs didn't come until the mid 90s, late 90s. So it kind of seems to be preceding those. Unfortunately, this version is saddled with a 4-speed automatic gearbox. You could get a 5-speed manual, but unfortunately that is not the one we have here, which is a bit of a shame really, because it doesn't have that much in the way of power from its 1.5 litre inline 4 engine, which you'll see now. So yeah, not a particularly interesting engine. 16 valves, and it means it only produces 108 horsepower and 97 pounds-feet of torque. So yeah, with that minimal amount of horsepower and torque on the go, it would be nice to have a manual, to be honest, so you can make the most of it, but unfortunately it's only got an automatic gearbox. With that said though, despite all of that glass and the complicated door arrangements, it does only weigh 2,050 pounds, so even though it's not got that much in the way of power and torque, it also doesn't have that much in the way of weight to lug around either. So yeah, nonetheless, let's get out onto the open road and see what this car can do. Right, once again here we are at the drag strip, so let's see what this car can do before we hit the speed camera, and then we'll get it round the track. So yeah, being front wheel drive and not that more powerful, it's not the sharpest of vehicles off the line, which is obviously not helped by the automatic gearbox, but at least the engine does rev to more than 7,000 RPM, so that's something it does have on its side. It's just a shame that we don't have a manual gearbox to make the most of those RPMs and the horsepower and torque that it does have. So yeah, only 91 miles an hour there. I think that's actually as quick as the Autozam got up to, despite having less power. It's got, what, 45 less horsepower, and 34 less in pounds per feet of torque, but just because it weighs less, it's actually just as quick in terms of acceleration and getting up to the same kind of speed before the speed camera as well. So yeah, that just shows that the automatic gearbox really is not making the most of that engine that we have on the go. But because it doesn't weigh all that much, it's still a really rather quite nippy car, and the front wheel drive, you know, isn't being overwhelmed by horsepower, so you've got no torque steer to worry about, and yeah, you don't have to worry about any wheel spin either in the corners. So yeah, but we are in D class again. 3 of the 4 in this car pack have been in D class in fact, but this is actually the lowest of the bunch, I believe. Yeah, the Mitsubishi's 457 and the AutoZam is 450. So yeah, but stat wise it's fairly decent, but again, like the Nissan Stager, it does have woeful launch purely because of that automatic gearbox, but the speed, handling and braking are all fairly decent. Acceleration is fine, but as you can see it's less than the AutoZam, and it's heavily weighted up front as well, but because it doesn't have that much in the way of weight anyway, understeer really isn't that much of an issue, especially given, again, there's not much power going for those front wheels to challenge the handling and the chassis overall as well. So yeah, it's just a shame really that underneath it's nowhere near as interesting as the way it looks, but that's the case for a lot of cars from the 90s that are like this, to be honest. But nonetheless, let's hear what it sounds like and then we'll talk about it some more. So yeah, the engine sounds fine. It's nothing remarkable, but at least it doesn't sound awful. Main issue though is the fact that the automatic gearbox does not seem to keep the revs in the power band. You'll see when we change into 3rd gear, it just seems to like drop off. Yeah, like that. It just drops below 5,000 RPM and it just really does slow down. So yeah, so that's why the acceleration isn't all that great. Despite having more power than the AutoZam, it's actually slightly slower to 60 at 10.519 seconds, so that's 0.019 seconds slower. But it's also significantly slower to 100 because of the way the gearbox is acting. 0 to 100 is dealt with in 30.937 seconds, so that's more than 3 seconds slower than the AutoZam. Although, because it does have slightly more, obviously it has a lot more in the way of power and torque, it is actually better at the top end at 120 miles an hour. So, decent top speed, but yeah, the acceleration because of that automatic gearbox is really held back. Be interested to know what the acceleration times are for the manual version. I imagine they are better, because at the end of the day you can work the gearbox to make the most of the power and keep it in the torque band and such, whereas this is automatic gearbox. As soon as you seem to get into 3rd, you seem to lose all real momentum and such, which means that yeah, you need an awful long runway to get up to 120 mile an hour with this car. But still, handling wise it's fairly good. Because the power is on the downside, it's, yeah, the front wheels aren't having to deal with all that much, and therefore you've got really good turning. The brakes are decent. Again, you don't have much in the way of weight to deal with, so yeah, it slows down decent enough even if it doesn't have the best brakes. I know the one version of the car did have disc brakes up front, but also had drums in the rear. If you have the ABS version of this car, then it does have disc brakes all round. But still, it's a decent car. But at the end of the day, it is a car that looks better than it drives, and looks better than it is in terms of how interesting it is underneath. Much like the Honda Del Sol, I think it's called, looks like a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car, but it really isn't. It's just as front-wheel drive and just as front-engine as this. So yeah, that's kind of a problem that a lot of Japanese subcompact sporty-looking cars had, to be honest. But at least this does have the doors and the canopy looks, and at the front it does look really rather nice as well. Just a shame that, like I said, underneath is nowhere near as interesting or as fun as it could have been. Nonetheless, so this is part of the JDM Duels car pack. It's not my favourite of the four. It's probably my least favourite of the four, in fact, purely just because it's nowhere near as interesting to drive as the other three. But still, it is still a good car. It is a car that we've never had in a Forza game before, and yeah, it makes up a really rather fantastic car pack overall. So yeah, get out there and get it if you haven't already. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.